Okay, everyone, let's finish up this challenge. Hopefully you were able to finish and get the ball to bounce up and down. If you weren't able to, remember we can always, once you're done with this workshop, you can come back to it and we can finish that up. So now we're going to learn about loops. So Manas is going to tell us a little bit more about loops.
Yep. So when you need to write the same lines of code over and over again, it gets annoying to rewrite them. And so loops takes that and is a way to write all of those lines of code in only two instructions for the computer to execute. So for example, we created the washing dishes function that tells us how to wash a dish. But instead of writing the washing dishes function over and over again, we could just put it in a loop. And so loops are just repetition and make your coding skills more concise and more meaningful.
So while loops are just one type of loop that can help us accomplish what we need. So a while loop is just a statement that allows the code to be executed repeatedly based on a given true or false condition. So these are very similar to if and then statements. So if we say while there are dirty dishes in the sink, we keep washing them. When there are no more dishes left, the loop will end. So in the diagram, we have A as the while part. So if we put dirty dishes as A, so if A is true, then we go on to B, which is keep washing them. So if we still have dirty dishes in the sink, we keep washing them. But if A is false, then there's no more dishes left in the sink, which means we end the loop.
Okay, so right now your landscape's pretty boring. There's just a sun in the corner and you have like one lonely tree slash bush thing. So using your new knowledge of while loops, try to add more trees and bushes so then your landscape looks prettier.
So this is going to be our next challenge. And in this one, we're going to be utilizing the while loops. So for this one, I'm going to send the link again in the chat. So try opening up this link and it should take you to our challenge today. All right, everyone. Hopefully you've been able to open up the challenge. And this challenge is called Loopy Landscape. So now let's learn how to complete it. Wow. Okay. So this is a pretty boring landscape. I mean, it looks okay. We have a sun and we have a tree, but apart from that, there's nothing else, right? It's just empty. There's nothing moving around. It's all really boring. But what we can do is we can try replicating this tree and this grass block a bunch of times. So rather than creating this tree and grass block on our own and writing this code over and over again, we can use a loop to do this for us. So in this challenge, we're going to use the while loop that we just learned about to fill up this canvas. So first of all, we're going to try making a new variable. So I'm going to make a variable, and right here, as you can see, we're initializing some variables, so I'm just going to do it right here. Let's set this to xPOS. What does xPOS mean? This is the x position. It stands for the x position. So let's just set this to 0 for now. Remember, we have our semicolon, which tells us that this line of code is done and the computer can keep moving on. Now we're over here, where we're going to draw some images. Now, as you can see here, we're drawing an image called grass. And using KhanJS, we were able to get this grass block. But we're just drawing this at this 0 point. So let's change this to our variable of xPOS. So as you can see, it didn't change anything because we're just using a variable instead of the 0 value. This will help us in our challenge to make it easier to replicate this code again and again. Now our next step is to use a while loop. And this while loop is going to create this grass block and this tree again and again. So it fills up the canvas and it looks a lot nicer. So now that we have our variable called x position, we're going to create a while loop. So as you can see, it uses the syntax similar to the if statement. Instead of putting if, we just put in the word while, and that tells us that we're going to start a while loop. Now we're going to put in a open parentheses, which tells us this is the condition that we need to set true in order for the while loop to iterate. So over here, as we can see, we're going to set it so that um, you know if the variable is less than a certain value, then we're going to keep drawing the grass and tree again and again until it reaches the end of the screen. So over here, remember, don't be afraid to try something. If it doesn't work out, you can always come back to the code again. So we're going to set x as less than and then some value. So we want to keep drawing this until x reaches the end of the screen. So try typing in the chat what you think that the x should be less than. It should be a numerical value from 0 to 400. So when do you think x should end? So it looks like we have some guesses. Some people saying 400, some people saying 300. So all of you are correct. So let's try putting in 400 for now. So while x is less than 400, now we're going to execute this code right inside of here. Oh, let's change this to x position. So now let's take this code that we put over here and put it inside of the while loop. We can do this either by using the copy paste function, or we can just move our bracket to the end. So now it's going to draw our image at the x position. But as you can see, it's just going to keep drawing this over and over again because the x position isn't changing. So now the last thing we have to do is we just have to change this to x position is equal to, so plus equals is the same thing as doing equal to x pos plus 50. So we're doing the same thing here, except plus equals just makes it a lot easier. So we can do it like this. The plus equals is basically doing the same thing as equals a value plus another value. So it will just keep increasing the value by 50 every time this while loop runs. And as you can see, we've drawn the block. So it looks a lot more interesting, but they're overlapping. So we can try experimenting with this value using the slider to see what happens. And as you can see, if we do that, it's going to draw over itself a bunch of times. So we're going to try increasing this value a lot. And let's see what happens. And if it takes a few seconds to run, that's just because remember, it's looping this again and again, so it might take a little while. So finally, if we set this to 100, we can see that it drew these grass blocks. Now what's happening, let's recap this, right? So what's happening here is we have this variable called x position, and we're setting this to 0. So this is just 0 over here at the start. Now we're creating a while loop, and we're saying while the x position is less than 400, which is at the edge of the canvas, we're going to execute this code where we're drawing the tree and the grass. And every time we draw a tree and a grass, we're going to increment the x position by 100. So this is telling us that the x position is equal to the x position plus 100. So it's just adding on to this value. So the first time it runs, it's going to be at 0. Then it's going to add 100, so it'll be over here. Now it's going to draw the tree again, and it's going to increase again by 100. It's going to draw the tree again, increase by 100. It'll do it one more time, and then finally the x position is equal to 400, so the while loop will stop running, and as you can see, we finished the challenge. All right, so hopefully you were able to follow along with that challenge. If you're a little bit confused, don't worry because we're going to keep using the skills that we just learned in the next couple of challenges. Okay, how many of you are done with this challenge? Put a message in the chat if you're finished. All right, so we're going to give you 30 more seconds to finish up the challenge. If it says that your while loop took too long to run, it means that you're not incrementing this value. So make sure that you add this line of code in and you set it to 100 or at least something so that it's able to create the trees. Because if you set it to something like 1, then it's just going to do it too many times. And while it's doing it, it might show that error that it's taking too long to run. All right, let's move on. So this was just one type of loop, but there's another type of loop that we can learn about. And this loop is called the for loop. So Manas, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the for loop?
Yep. So for loops perform the same task as while loops. But however, for loops are different from while loops because there is a special place to put the variable. Increment, increase, and inequality, like you can see in the images in the presentation.
So as you can see, the while loop and the for loop, they can both accomplish the same thing. But the for loop gives us a little bit more control, and we can have, as Manas said, we can implement some things like inequalities, which we're going to learn in this next challenge. So this challenge is called lined paper.
Okay, so the line paper you can see on the screen there, it was drawn using a while loop, but you can achieve the exact same result using a for loop. So try converting the while loop to a for loop.
So I'm going to post the link to the challenge in the chat box. So check the chat box and open up the lined paper challenge. Okay, so welcome to the lined paper challenge. Over here, we have some wonderful lined paper that we could write on. But over here, we're using a while loop. So let's try using a for loop instead. As you can see, in this challenge, we need to draw 20 horizontal lines that go down. And without using a loop, this would take a really long time because we need to keep drawing a line and then another line and then another line. So the while loop made this really easy for us. But let's try using a for loop instead of this. So as we can see in this challenge, we have a while loop that says while I is less than 20, we're going to draw another line on the screen. But it might be a little bit easier to instead use ourselves a for loop. So over here, I'm going to try changing this while loop to a for loop. So we can use something, we can initialize variables inside of the for loop itself using these semicolons. So let's first initialize a variable called I. And as you can see in the while loop, we had to do it before the loop, but the for loop is really convenient because it allows us to do everything in one space. So let's remove this and instead initialize it right here. And we're going to say var I is equal to 0. Next up, the next thing we need to do is we need to set our parameter. So over here, earlier, the while loop was checking if I was less than, I think, 20. So remember, we just have to use the same parameters. So the for loop allows us to do three things. We can first initialize a variable such as I, then we can check our condition, which was if I was less than 20, and then finally we can do our third thing, which is to increment the value of y. So I++ means that we're just taking the value of I and we're adding 1 to it every single time this loop runs. So let's add this code back so we can remove this variable right here, and then we can do var I is equal to 0. After that, it will check if I is less than 20 in order to run the loop, and finally, we can increment the value of I right over here. And as you can see, now we have some line paper. And one thing we can do, remember, is always in any type of program, you can always experiment with things, try things out, and it's always a lot of fun to do that. So as you can see, if I just try changing values just a little bit, we get totally different results. So I can create as many lines as I want. So I'm going to create 20, and I can even do things like I can say I can increase the value of I by a lot, and that will allow us to create more lines, less lines, the lines that are more spaced out, and things like that. So now we're going to add one more for loop, it seems, to draw 20 vertical lines. So this will turn our paper into grid paper rather than our paper that you can use for writing. We're going to turn this into paper we can use for math. So let's add another for loop. Over here, we're going to use our for. So this is how we can create a for loop. Remember, we do for, and then our parentheses, and then these brackets, which tell us whatever's inside of these brackets is the code that we're running. So for this for loop, we're just going to set, first we're going to initialize our variable. So we're going to set j is equal to 0. Then we're going to say j, while j is less than 20, we're going to run this loop. And every time the loop runs, we're going to set j is equal to j plus 1, which is just this j++. It's just an easier way of writing it. We're going to create one more variable, and we're going to name this line x.
Rishabh, could you slow down? I think they need a little bit more time.
Yeah, sure, of course. All right, everyone. So let's just quickly recap what we've done so far. So the first thing we did is rather than using a while loop to create the lines, we used a for loop. And the for loop just allows us to combine everything inside of one statement. So this right here is a statement. It's a condition. So inside the middle is our condition, which is while I is less than 20, we're going to run this loop. That's the first thing. Over here, we're initializing our variable of I. And over here, we're saying I++. So every time this loop runs, we're going to do whatever we put inside of here. So over here, every time the loop runs, we want to increase I by 1. So now the next thing we wanted to do was we wanted to turn this into grid paper. So we're going to create some vertical lines. Over here, we're just going to use a random variable name. It's called j, and we're setting j is equal to 0. Then we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to say if j is less than 20, then we're going to run this loop. And once the loop runs once, we're going to increase the value of j by 1. The next step is to create our line. So we're setting a variable called line x, which is equal to 20 plus j times 20. And we can look at exactly what this means in a little bit. Then finally, what we have to do is we're going to use a function. It's called the line function. And this is very, very similar to what we've done in the past workshops with the different shapes, right? So we learned about the line function. It works with the x1, a y1 coordinate. So that's telling us where the line will start. And then we tell us where the line is going to end. So x1 and x2 is going to, or x1 and y1 is going to be our first coordinate, and x2 and y2 is going to be our second coordinate, which is where the line ends. So the line will have an x coordinate of 20, and the last line should have an x coordinate of 400. So to do this, we used our line x function. So remember, all we have to do is try out something at the start, and then we can change accordingly. So as you can see, I just put in some random values. I thought that, hey, if we take this variable called line x and we try using it in our line function, it might help us out because that's the goal of the challenge. And then I put some random values like 10 and 400. So 400 is the end where the line will end every single time. So it's going to end at the very end of the screen right here. And every single time we're taking the line x value and we're multiplying j by 20. So that's going to tell us to increase this value of x again and again until we reach the end of the screen. So the last thing we need to do is we're going to read this message. It's saying, where do your vertical lines start and end? So they're ending at 400, but they're starting at the value of 10. So what we need to do here is we just need to change this to 0. And the line will start at 0 and end at 400. And every time this loop runs, we're going to increase the value of j. So it's going to increase by 20 since we're multiplying it by 20. And the line is just going to get drawn again and again and again until we're done with the paper. So if you were able to complete the challenge already, the next thing that you can do while everyone else is catching up or they're trying it out on their own, how about you try changing the color of the line every time it gets drawn? Otherwise, if you're still following along with this challenge, we'll give you a couple of minutes to try it out and try experimenting with the values to see what you can get done. Okay, everyone, so it's been a couple of minutes. Hopefully, you were able to complete the challenge. If you weren't able to fully get it done, remember you can always work on it after the workshop is done. But let's just quickly go over it one last time. So, first, we drew the horizontal lines which go across the screen. So, to do this, we use the for loop. We set the variable called I equal to 0. Then we said that to run this loop, we're going to check if I is less than 20. If I isn't less than 20, we're not going to run uh, the loop. And then we're going to increment the value of I. So if I is 22, then we're going to stop running the loop. But if I is 5, we're going to keep running it until I reaches 20. And every time the loop runs, we're going to set I is equal to I plus 1, which is what this I plus plus means. So if the loop starts at 0, we run it, we draw a line, then it's going to set I equal to 1. We're going to run it, it'll draw a line, then it's going to keep doing this again and again until we reach the end of the screen. Line y is another variable, and we set that equal to 20 plus I times 20. So what this means is I is equal to this value that we've been iterating. So while I is equal to 1, we're going to multiply it by 20. So 1 times 20 is equal to 20. So we're going to draw it at 20. And then we're going to add this value of 20 each time. So it doesn't just start at this 0 value. And then we keep doing that every single time. So as you can see, it keeps advancing by 20 pixels down. And then this final line is just where we draw. We use the line function. So we set the starting value, which is the x coordinate, to 0. And then we set the y coordinate equal to line y, which is our y coordinate here. So it's going to keep increasing by 20. We set it to 400, so it ends all the way at 400. So it starts at 0, ends all the way at 400. And finally, line y is our y2 value, which tells us the second, like where the y value would end. So it's still going to end at that same spot. So it's going to start here, it's going to end here. And then we keep drawing this until the loop is done, and we looped it 20 times. So that's how you can draw these horizontal lines. And we do the exact same thing, except we just set this to the x value here when we draw the vertical lines. And that's how we finish the challenge. So this line paper challenge was pretty fun, but let's get into the project, which is going to be creating a house. And Akshay is going to tell us a little bit more about how we're going to create this project.
Okay, so you have to use like all your coding skills. You need to use variables and you need to use loops to build a house which has with windows, paneling, and grass. So your goal is just to build a simple house using all the skills you've learned so far.
So if you all have ever seen a house getting built, there's a lot of different things, and houses are really unique. Every single house is different and special in its own way. So in this project, it's up to you to use your creativity and decide what you want to make this house with. So I'm going to post the link to this project in the chat, and then we're going to learn a little bit more about how we can complete this project. So everyone head over to the chat and click on the link, and this will take you to our Build a House project. So as Akshay told you guys, you're going to use the coding skills that you've learned to create some awesome things. So let's learn more about this house. So go over to the link that was sent in the chat. So Akshay, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what we have to do in this challenge?
Okay, so you basically just have to build a house. It can be any type of house. It doesn't have to be perfectly. It doesn't have to be copied from someone else. It's just your own creativity. So you need to draw a couple of windows on your house. So if you've ever seen outside your window, you look out your window, you can see maybe grass or a lawn or something like that, right? So we need to draw a window. So we can use a for loop to draw a row of windows on your house. And then maybe you could draw some grass in the front. If you've ever seen like a front lawn, you could try to draw that using a different type of loop. You can either use a while loop or a for loop. And then you could change the color of your house if you wanted to. So not all houses are the same color, are they? So you could maybe have the roof like a bright pink color, or um, the regular house itself a blue color. You can choose whichever colors you want. And you can really just play around with this to understand all the things you've learned about so far.
So together in this project, we're going to be creating some grass, and then you'll get some work time to work on this project. So first together, let's create some grass. So at the very front of our house, we want to draw some grass. And to do this, we can actually use the images library that KhanJS has to create an image. So in our workshops, we actually haven't learned how to use other images, and we've only learned how to draw our own shapes. So this is really cool because we can create our own grass. Like we can use a very quality image of a grass instead of like drawing it by ourselves. So over here, I'm just going to create a variable. And again, this is up to you. It's totally up to you. So if you don't want to create the grass using this way, you don't have to. But together, we're just going to create this grass so you get an idea of how you can do it. So I'm going to create a variable called grass, and I'm going to set it to image. And as you can see, it tells us that we can check the image library for a little bit more information on, how we can get the types of images that we want. But in general, what you have to do is you do image of get image, and then inside here, you can specify the image that you want. So that's our first parameter of the image function, image command. And the next two things are the X value and the Y value. So over here, I'm just going to set it to 0 and 400. So what that'll do is the X value is 0, Y value is 400. So it'll start at the bottom of our house where we want it to be. And over here in the get image, if you just click inside of the parentheses, it should show up this question mark, similar to how you could fill in the background, as you can see, right? It shows this little box. So you just want to click on that box. And you can use, there's so many different images. You could use leaves. You could even use, but I think there is a grass one. So we're going to be using that grass. Uh, so believe grass block. So we're just going to click on that grass block. You can also type it in cute/grass block and in our string. Remember about strings that we learned in the last workshop. And then finish off with a semicolon. The next thing we have to do is actually draw the grass. So in order to draw grass, what we're going to do is we have our image, but we haven't actually used it yet. So what we can do is we can use our for loop or our while loop to draw the grass all the way across the all the way across the canvas. So that will help us out. So I'll give you a few seconds if you're following along to type in this variable called grass. And actually, what we can do instead of doing this, this is a little bit more complicated way of doing it, is we can just set variable grass equal to the image itself. So then it'll make it easier to repeat itself more. So actually, you can just use this get image function just like this without the coordinates yet. We can try using the coordinates in a little bit. And if you weren't able to figure out how to do the image, again, we're just going to create a variable called grass, and we're going to do get image with some parentheses, and then click on this and try scrolling all the way down until you find this grass. If you don't like the grass that they gave, you can also use something like a leaf, right? There's a lot of leaves here, some other characters, but try using the grass one. That one will fit in a little bit better. Okay, and then the next thing we have to do to create our grass row is use a while loop. So what we can do is we can set a variable. So it's saying use loops. So we can use any type of loop that we want. So let's just try creating a variable. We're going to name this x variable x position is equal to 0. And then we're going to say while x position is less than 400, we're going to execute the code that's inside of these brackets. So it's going to tell us that a while loop is taking too long to run because there's nothing inside of the loop. So it's just going to keep doing this again and again, and it's never going to finish doing anything. So that's it's giving us that little error. But I'm just going to wait a few more seconds so you guys can follow along with the grass. Okay, so now we're going to use our image function, which is actually going to draw the grass. So all we have to do now is, since we use this variable already, we just have to type in grass, and then we're going to type in the x coordinate and y coordinate. So let's set the x coordinate equal to x pos or x position, because that's going to tell us that it's going to start at our x position. And let's set our y value to around 270. So as you can see, it drew our block of grass, but it's saying that it's too long. It's taking too long to run because this while loop is just going to keep running this again and again. Remember, so what we have to do is we're going to have to increment the x position value. So let's try doing, we can use our little indicator that we learned about, the plus equals to. So then we can set this equal to something like 50. And as you can see, we drew some beautiful grass on the ground of our house. So remember, you can use comments on your code to make it nice and organized, like drawing grass or whatever you want. And the rest is up to you. So it's up to you to decide how you want to draw windows, how you want to paint the rest of the house, maybe make a sun. And yeah, uh, Manas, Akshay, and Vesh, do you have any ideas on things they can do or any challenges you want them to focus on?
Well, they can also use the images library to find like paneling for their house. So they can just grab like a brick image and then use a loop to repeat all the images so it becomes paneling.
And you can probably add a few characters in front of your house or like through your window to make it look like they're going into their house.
All right, everyone. So you're going to have 5 minutes today during this workshop to work on your house. So for the next 5 minutes, feel free to try out whatever you want on your house. And then after this workshop is over, after 3 p.m., you can try, doing whatever you want to do on your house. So it's up to you. But you'll have the next 5 minutes. I'm just going to keep adding a couple of things. So in case you need a little bit of inspiration or you want to look at some of the code, I'm just going to keep adding a few things. So you can just, you should be working on your house, but if you need, a little bit of help, feel free to ask any questions in the chat or check out the thing that I'm going to share. Okay, everyone, hopefully you had a good start on your build a house project. In case you were busy making your own house and didn't get a chance to see the things that we had suggested, you can try making a character using the character and get image function, so it will look really nice. I also tried making some windows, and you can definitely try, adding panels on the side of your house, adding a sun, changing colors. So there's a ton of things you can do with this project, and you can continue working after the workshop. So now we're going to move on with the next thing. So let's get into additional resources.
Yeah, so if you guys want to keep working towards your coding skills, you could go to Khan Academy Intro to JS course or Advanced JS to figure out drawing and animation, natural simulation, games, and even games and visualizations. So you guys can do that at Khan Academy.
Any questions?
So feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. So before you all start heading off, we just want to thank all of you for, being taking a part of our 4 workshop series. This was so much fun, and we hope you learned a lot about coding. If this was your first time, coding can be used to do so many different and cool things, and the possibilities are really just endless. So as Manas mentioned, there's going to be some additional resources that you can search up on Khan Academy. So you can type in Khan Academy JavaScript. And yeah, so Anbesha is answering some of your questions in the chat room. So try, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. Again, we really hope you enjoyed these workshops and learned about coding. This is really exciting, and there's so many different cool things you can do as you get more familiar with programming. We'll send out an email to either your parents, or if you registered using your email, with a recap of everything that we've done in the last 4 workshops, and some additional resources that you can view. So make sure to keep your eyes open for that. Any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Again, we hope you had an awesome time. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're going to be hosting some more workshops in the next couple of months. So definitely thank you all so much for being here. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.